You may remember, there was a time there, like in the mid-90s, where sci-fi was going in a particular direction, where it was like, they really went all out on the virtual reality thing in the most 90s way possible. And they actually did it, in a sense, twice in the same summer of 1995, where we had Johnny Mnemonic come out on May 26th, I think, and Virtuosity that August 4th. So they kind of bookended the summer a little bit, and both in their own extremely, incredibly 90s cheesy sort of way. So I thought we'd go ahead and explore that for this week. Let's go ahead and start with Johnny Mnemonic, especially since it comes from William Gibson, who not only did the short story, obviously, but also adapted it into the screenplay. So it's hard to tell where exactly the fault falls in regards to the transition here, but we will get more into that. But basically, what it comes down to is they do have a lot of things that changed, more so character wise, which we'll get into. But there was also some really crucial stuff, like the entire whole push of the movie, like what almost ends up being the MacGuffin of the movie, which is the whole NAS thing. I guess is strictly born from the screenplay process. So, but on top of that, also, obviously, it's worth noting that William Gibson is the guy that basically, like, you hear it in sort of a few ways depending on who you're talking to, but it's to my understanding that he more or less, I guess, pioneered would be the word, the cyberpunk genre. Like, he's the one that basically solidified it and turned it into what was essentially, like, a legit genre. Just cyberpunk by itself, just the whole subgenre in general. But what it brought to us in this adaptation is, once again, a cheesy 90s sci-fi movie that also has a very odd and interesting cast. Very diverse, you might say. For instance, we have, obviously our lead is Keanu Reeves, still sort of, this would have been right after Speed, but despite the success of Speed, his acting abilities were still being constantly brought into question. So it was. You could say it was the year after Speed, but you could also say it was only 3 years after Dracula. So there's that. Um, but we also have Dino Meyer, who would go on to do Starship Troopers, a much easier to easier to like, I guess, venture into sci-fi. But then there's also you've got Dolph Lundgren playing one of your main villains. You have Ice-T, Udo B. Takeshi, or Takeshi Kitano, whoever you want to call him. In the movie, he's just credited as Takeshi, so there's that. And probably a couple more people I'm forgetting. Henry Rollins, and probably a couple of other people as well. Very odd casting and very odd roles. So we do have. So of course we have Keanu Reeves in this about 4 years before he did The Matrix, which of course, once again, probably much better venture into this sort of territory. But even so, we begin in talking about that cheesiness I'm talking about. Our opening shot is just this whole sort of inside this sort of cyber world, and the location that's given to us and the year is Internet 2021. So, and of course, it's one of those movies where even though it begins with like rolling text and all that, it still has to give us an exposition dump even when the characters are introduced. So we do get the whole idea of the, albeit interesting, concept where it's the we talk about the procedure that he's gone through where he's able to upload all this stuff into his mind, and he's able to carry around this very crucial information that's too, sensitive to be put in places that could be easily hacked into or whatever the 90s considered hacking, which we know there are variations of, see the net with Sandra Bullock and stuff like that. But then there's also the whole idea of him wanting to get the memories that he had to take out in order to fit this stuff in back, like his childhood. And he basically tells Udo this entire situation, despite the fact that these two are well aware of it. He's clearly talking to us, despite the fact that we already have rolling text telling us enough. It's a lot to keep up with in the first 3 minutes. So if you can do that, you will eventually get to the ultimate cliche, the one last job cliche. So that's really what the main point of the story is. Like I said, the whole angle of what it is he's doing almost seems like a MacGuffin to basically just be a normal guy being chased by the Yakuza on his last job thing or whatever, with some weird sci-fi shit thrown in. And you'll notice the director is a guy named Robert Longo, and he's one of those directors to where it's like, you see how the movie's a bit shoddily put together, so you're like, what else did this guy even do? Well, research tells me he did like a couple of REM videos, and this was like his only actual feature. Like, this was his only movie, so whatever that tells you. You look up the guy on IMDb, and he looks like the distant cousin of Andrew Dice Clay with like a ponytail over his shoulder. And it's this is the kind of movie you pretty much expect from that. So, going into that, talking about the cast we have here, obviously it's a very, very Keanu performance, especially in 1995. Where he's got that, I mean, you do really want to like him anyway, but he's got like that really forced but unconvincing determination. Stuff like when he first shows up, despite the fact he's like this very serious dude with this very serious job, he shows up to these defectors and he's like posing as a pizza guy, just for laughs. Like, it's not even for a purpose, just to fuck with them, I guess. And then we do the whole thing where, like, when he sets it up, he has that Keanu delivery of, like, hit me, which I'm sure was very cool in 1995. All the way down to, he almost gets into Nicolas Cage territory by the time we get to I want room service. So, so this is our main character. It is, to my understanding, getting into Dana Meyer now, that in the short story, Johnny Mnemonic is not, like, the action hero. It is this character named Molly Millions, who is now this generic character played by Dana Meyer that doesn't even have the same name because of, like, a copyright issue. So now, poor Dana Meyer has to come into this story, and basically, she could have been like this big action heroine going by that. But since Johnny Mnemonic is the action hero now in the movie version, Dana Meyer is basically here to be relatively useless and humiliate herself. See, for instance, the scene where she gets, like, the black shakes. It's like asking any actor to do that is asking them, like I said, to humiliate themselves, but hey, she went for it. But ultimately, and she's got like the really stiff line readings too, where we can tell in like the Yudokira scenes at the beginning, she's supposed to be badass. Like, we get a sense of what the character's supposed to be, and once was in short story format. But here, and others as well. But here we just get a sense that she's basically the character that's here so that he can have somebody to almost kiss when just the movie gets to those cliche moments. So we're dealing with that. So that's kind of an unfortunate character change, but we do have our villain here, Dolph Lundgren, as the street preacher, which is something that was probably a lot cooler in certain stages, and it was basically comes down to the execution that like really failed this. Because well, first off, if I remember correctly, I believe I read somewhere that this was the last movie that Dolph Lundgren was in that got a theatrical release before The Expendables came out 15 years later. So it's like, maybe it was embarrassment, I don't know. But there are cases, though, where it feels like he could have been this really awesome character. Just kind of, just his name and his appearance and your casting choice. It feels like something could have worked here, even if it's in a cheesy way. In this movie, a cheesy way is right at home, so that's encouraged at this point. But what happens with this character is, it's like you have that one cool moment where it's like you just see his shadow on the wall and you know he's coming. And all this scene amounts to is him saying, "Halt, sinners!" and getting hit by a vehicle. So it's sort of like when Lopan gets hit by the truck at the beginning of Big Trouble in Little China. But the thing here is that it feels like the character, he comes in awfully late into the movie with hardly an introduction. I mean, they try, but I mean, there's not like, he's hardly built up to. They say like vaguely what he's capable of, and then he just kind of comes in and out until he's defeated pretty easily. And that's pretty much our main villain, and it's pretty much just as underwhelming as most of the movie is. And really kind of shows you, he's kind of really this whole sort of symptom of what's wrong with the movie as a whole, to where it's like, all this stuff that seems like a really good idea that could have been just really blown up, like, in some big cheesy way, which, like I said, could have been what this, if this movie just kept embracing that, we may have, like, had something, like, really, really hugely entertaining here, and I do know that there are some people that did get that out of this, but, it just feels like we're getting teased with it. It's like, this is what this movie could be, or this scene is what this movie could be, and we get, like, the tiniest little taste of it, and just by the time we get that little taste, it's done doing that, and is going on to the next thing, which is probably not going to be as successful in bringing this whole thing to life. So, on top of that, because we also got, Ice-T gets an introduction that's pretty sloppy, because we have, well, first, going back, there's the scene with the defectors where they get, there's the dude that works for Takeshi, but then there's also those other guys, like the bald guy. And it's like, when we first see them, we think, okay, they're going to kind of keep hopping in and out of the movie, they're going to chase him around, they'll get to do some fighting and all that. And this bald guy in particular, it seems clear that they wanted him to stand out with his appearance, so it's like, I wonder if he's like the muscle of the group. Let's see. So that first action scene plays out and stuff like that, where we get stuff like, them, like, it's a shootout and it's sort of like there's an anime playing on TV and it's sort of like it's trying to thematically mirror that or something. It's trying to do something, but anyway, so we think this bald guy might be, like, the big threat and all that, but really, maybe that's my misinterpretation, I don't know. But he lasted much shorter than I was assuming. This whole group, really. So, we get this Ice-T introduction where we really, it really does a poor job of laying out even what exactly Ice-T's character is doing. He's basically like, he feels like a low-rent version of the Scraps from Demolition Man. He even gets a sort of monologue similar to what Dennis Leary did, but Demolition Man got the point across much clearer. So he's basically just here doing, kind of popping in and out occasionally once again, sort of like with warnings and shit like that. But it really doesn't feel like it goes many places. Like, once again, they just kind of keep showing us that's kind of the direction they want to go, but they're not really going to do a whole lot to get in that direction. Just kind of set it up and then sort of abandon it. So, and this really sloppy scene where they introduce him is like, well, when we see him, like, in person, he's with this dude, and we realize that this group should be, like, this big sort of, like, resistance group or something, but the problem here is that they don't seem all that together. Case in point, the first time we see him, he's standing next to that dude, and they're on that ledge, and they're sort of looking out, and we're clear that they're all part of the same group here, and then this dude just gets offed and, like, falls to his death, and Ice-T's character has, like, no reaction. He, like, runs up to his body, but then it's like this character never existed, and they built it up like it was going to be, like, his little buddy or something, and they just set it up, and then they abandon it. That's, like, what this movie's whole credo was going into it. And once again, don't even bother to embrace the cheesiness. Because we get to the moment when the bald guy is going to kill him, and he says, like, say bye, and then somebody comes up and takes him out. And the response isn't to say bye anyway, which would have been the great 90s cheesy moment. What Schwarzenegger was doing in Commando, one-liners like that. Even if they suck, they would have been there and they would have added that charm to the movie. But no, they just let it go. And then we go on to the next thing. And that's, once again, just the way they really sloppily handle these characters. Like, the Udo character, for instance, Ralphie, where he's the one that's, like, obviously he's the one that's in the know on all this, and obviously Johnny trusts him. That I'm, once again, not quite sure what their connection to each other is, but there's a clear trust here. He's the one that's, like, basically telling him where to go and all that shit. So, shortly after we've met this character, like, probably, like, the first or second scene we see him in person, which is happening very quickly, this is all in, like, the first 25 minutes, it turns out that he's bad. And so, it's like, so we've just met this character, and now it's supposed to be this big twist that he's a bad guy, holy shit. And then, like, just before you even have time to go, oh, well, you're still pondering, like, oh, well, I didn't really know him that much, so I guess it doesn't really matter if it was surprising or not if he was bad. He's dead. Like, you can't even, by the time you get that together, he has already been killed. Granted, his death scene's probably one of the more memorable scenes in the movie, quick as it is, getting the sliced in half and multiple parts and all that. So there is that, but, and then lastly, as far as the other characters go, there's the Takeshi character, which is very much, it just feels, once again, like they totally abandoned something, to where it's like, he seems like he's built up to be really important, like the really big boss character and all that, and then ultimately he's just kind of pointless. He has like a couple of scenes, there's the whole Ghost in the Machine thing, but that's, yeah, like I said, it just feels like we're just really going nowhere with all this stuff. Apparently, for obvious reasons, especially with his popularity there, apparently he had more to do, he had more screen time in the Japanese version of the movie, which my understanding is, like, different in a number of ways, has, like, a lot of other scenes that weren't in this one that were cut out, has, like, a whole other score by Michael Dana that's, like, probably stands out a lot more, so, being as accomplished as he is. And yeah, it just feels like a whole bunch of dead ends until we get to the Henry Rollins stuff and the dolphin stuff. And as it gets more and more out there, but not in the best way, probably would have been in the best way if the movie had really embraced the parts it should have been, like the whole cheesiness of it and just going for it. But the fact that the movie doesn't feel like it's going for it, it feels like it's just taken these really basic roads, with just like, it's almost like we're taking a basic road, but there's a little bit of the scenic route in there with some of the weird, more outlandish shit, and some of the stuff that we would like to explore more. It's like, it's all there, but we're not taking that road, we can just see it from a distance. We're just driving by, and it's, yeah, it's kind of a letdown, so... and it does have some of those shots, like it has like the fake-looking city shot, where like the eyes fade in over it and then dissolve in, and then we dissolve into the scene where he's looking through the blinds, and it's like stuff like that. If they, like I said, the city looks fake and all that, but then also, like, that could have been the movie's charm, was just to go for stuff like that. Especially when we actually go into the virtual reality stuff, and it becomes pretty much all CGI. Mind you, 1995 CGI. But by then, they've just gone so far away from what could have been the charm, and they're not embracing what they should be. It just doesn't do anything, really. It has no real impact, despite the fact what all the comments on the case will tell you. So it's, yeah, but there's really not a lot there, and it's really, like, it's really low on the detail for the kind of movie that it is. Like when we're on the whole, like, it's surface-level futuristic stuff, basically. And it's like, it doesn't take enough advantage of the world that it's set in and really goes into that stuff. And there's really not much complexity to it. It doesn't feel like it's complex anyway, because pretty much anything that's brought in that feels sort of weird and surreal and stuff like that is pretty much explained immediately. Like, they're afraid that they're gonna tune the audience out if, like, the audience doesn't immediately know what this bizarre thing is that's just entered the story. It's like they're too afraid to just kind of let that be what that is and let it sort of soak into the atmosphere of the whole thing. They want it to be known right away what its purpose is, regardless of how ridiculous or pointless. So, yeah. And then I had a quote from Gibson here where he tried to explain what exactly went down and how the movie sort of got in this way. What he says, the exact quote is, basically what happened was it was taken away and recut by the American distributor in the last month of its pre-release life, and it went from being a very funny, very alternative piece of work to being something that had been very unsuccessfully chopped and cut into something more mainstream. That sounds like it explains it, actually. Like, you see all the problems, and you're like, there must be some explanation. There it is, in 2 lines from the author himself. So that's really unfortunate. I would really love to see the movie that they wanted to make from the get-go. I'm not sure how much the Japanese version brings this back. I'm going to assume there's a lot... There's a bit too much wrong in the core of it to really imagine there's like a really great version that can exist from what they have. But yeah, it is one of those cases where it's like, maybe it's one of those movies that needs remade? I'm not totally sure. I don't know if it would seem a bit too... Because we've been in this territory now, if there would be a way to where it's like... I don't know, after seeing what Villeneuve did with, like, the new Blade Runner and stuff like that, maybe in a world like that, it would be interesting to see something like this, but they'd still have a lot to, they'd have to, like, it would almost have to look unrecognizable if you were comparing it to this movie. And taking the source material completely out of the equation of comparing the two, it would almost be like you could barely see this movie in it. So, I don't know, but that's kind of how I feel about that. Now, with all that said, it is something that's very easy to watch. So it's like, it's one of those things where if you're just in that mood, this could totally be one of those movies that just kind of fills that void that for some reason you find in you sometimes, or I guess don't find in you sometimes. So that accounts for me owning it, in case that was into question. But, so yeah, but I mean, overall still, regardless of how easy it might be to watch, especially as just some dumb sci-fi thing from the 90s, you do still constantly watch it just saying, what could have been, and just what isn't. So, that's really unfortunate. Now, going on to something much simpler with Virtuosity. What we've got with Virtuosity here is now we're set in 1999. We're only going 4 years into the future now. Interestingly enough, it's set in the year that The Matrix came out. And this is apparently what they thought we'd be doing already in that time frame. Almost 20 years ago now. So what we have here is before American Gangster happened, Denzel and Russell Crowe were going against each other again, only with the roles reversed, and one of them was like an artificial intelligence video game villain that has come to life. So take that for what you will. So I'm going to imagine that had nothing to do with Ridley Scott's casting process for that movie, but if you want to have fun with it, let's say that it is. So, what we have here is, we start off inside this virtual reality sort of training program for cops. Despite the fact that the cop that's in this scenario at the moment is a cop that is now currently a prisoner and a convict because he killed some innocent people in retaliation for the death of his family, while killing the killer as well. So now he's got like a metallic arm, and he's like, inside the program he looks like clean-cut, clean-shaven Denzel, but when he comes out of it in the real world and he's a convict, he has a very eerie resemblance to present-day Donald Glover with the hair and the beard. So so the thing that happens here though is that when he's inside, the program itself has a villain installed in it that they need to fight off. That's part of their training program, and this villain is Russell Crowe, playing this artificial villain named Sid, who manages to find a way to manifest himself into an android and get out and cause havoc. It's actually, quite honestly, a really cool concept. And the thing about this that really brings it to life is Russell Crowe, it was 3 years after Romper Stomper, 2 years before LA Confidential, so he could still pretty much do whatever the hell he wanted. There wasn't a whole lot of prestige to his name, because Romper Stomper was just this little thing that was a few years ago where he played the bad guy skinhead, and now he decides that this is going to be one of the most over-the-top performances in movie history. It's like, how could that ever come back to bite him? So, little does he know he's only 5 years away from an Oscar, but before he won that Oscar, he gave us this beautiful thing. So, when we first see him inside the program, we already get that sense. He basically, almost immediately, makes Dolph Lundgren as the street preacher looks like subtlety. So, he's eating sushi or whatever, and he's got a little bit on his face, and his tongue like comes out of his head and licks it off of himself, and then he stands up when he sees Denzel and starts firing like mad while laughing maniacally with crazy eyes. And this is just his introduction. This is the first time we've seen him. And little do we realize that this is what it's going to be every time he's on screen, and he's got a lot of screen time. So, and it's even nice to see, towards the end of this sequence at the beginning, he's already got a wound that's been shot into him, and Denzel takes his finger and sticks it into that wound. And in this moment, there is this gloriousness where already Oscar winner Denzel and future Oscar winner Russell Crowe just basically try to, like, out-ham each other in this moment. in this 90s sci-fi movie, and it is so worth seeing. So, and it's basically like two well-rounded actors just completely fucking around in this moment. And then the rest of the movie becomes this. So, going on, we eventually have scenes where, like, he takes hostages in, like, this whole big arena, and then he makes them scream, and then he conducts them like some scream orchestra. In this really bizarre yet amazing sequence. And it's really like just him killing time, just so he has something to laugh maniacally at. And and so going on, there's just these little moments throughout his performance, like when he's tearing a hole in the window of a train and to eat, and he just makes this bizarre groaning noise, almost like it's orgasmic for him or something. And it's like, this is so it's if you've seen Russell Crowe in all his more prestigious stuff like The Insider and Gladiator and A Beautiful Mind and stuff like that, this is such an odd experience, but in the best way, really. Because we also have there's also keep in mind there was only one movie between this and LA Confidential. This is how much he was able to like start reining his career after. It's almost like this role was him getting something out of his system that was in there before he went on to be this incredibly serious actor. So, but he also actually has some like really good lines in there when he's like able to, because the whole idea is that he has like the personalities of 200 serial killers inside him. Once again, this concept is actually like amazing, and it's basically like, it's sort of like that whole thing where it's like he's Wreck-It Ralph. How the whole thing about Wreck-It Ralph was he was the villain in a video game, and he really, outside of the video game, did not know how to be anything else. And it's like, just imagine that, but super, super fucking evil in the most over-the-top, hilarious way. As played by Russell Crowe. So, but there are actually these really cool moments when he really gets down into that villainous aspect of himself, where he's got the 200 serial killers inside him. He eventually starts, like, copycatting their crimes, which is something they do for, like, one scene. I actually wish they'd kind of done that more and explored a little more, but, even so, we do get these moments because he also, in a, you could say a stroke of genius, I suppose, but I mean, it's also blatantly obvious. Of course he's got the dude that killed Denzel's family in him, so he's able to, like, taunt him personally because he's got those memories in his head. So we have lines like, I'm carrying around the joy of killing your family inside me, and that doesn't mean we can't be friends. And it's, yeah, so pure insanity. And once again, that's pretty much what the rest of the movie is. Once he's out, the movie is pretty much non-stop, it feels like. It does have, you know, a sort of slow beginning where we're going through all the science-y stuff, or what this movie believes to be science-y stuff. Just them doing, like, spouting, like, movie scientist cliches and stuff like that. The one scientist that's just bad quite suddenly, and it is dealt with just as suddenly. Stuff like that. Like, it's not... it's... I wouldn't go out of my way to say it's, like, a crazy good movie or anything, but I mean... Like I was saying about Johnny Mnemonic, if this is the kind of movie you're looking for, there's quite a delivery here. The main problem, I would say, is the fact that even though it's, like, unlike Johnny Mnemonic, it's, like, significantly more action-packed. There's, like, a car chase in it, gunfights, all that stuff. The hand-to-hand fighting and all that. And like I said, it feels constant after a while. The trouble is like, you know, it's not exactly from a steady director's hand. It's like, these aren't exactly well-executed action scenes, but I mean, it's just enough to keep you watching it, and intrigued, and how, like I said, at least it feels like constant, which actually, you would think that would be annoying under a movie that's not exquisitely handled, but I mean, it's fun. It's very, very much, like, if you want to talk guilty pleasure movies, this is like that all day. So, and like I said, especially it's so bizarre seeing actors like Denzel and Russell Crowe do a movie like this. And there's also, like, another Oscar winner is in it, Louise Fletcher from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. A very throwaway, brief role, but still in there. And also, Kaylee Cuoco, before she was making millions off The Big Bang Theory, is Kelly Lynch's daughter is the one that ends up in distress that they have to save at the end, because of course they do. Once again, Kelly Lynch gets thrown away, even much more so than Dina Meyer and Johnny Mnemonic, but that was just the 90s cliche, so there's that. And that is kind of the deal, though, where it's like, despite these really awesome ideas, like this video game character that's escaped into the real world that has the personalities of 200 serial killers, awesome concept in this futuristic world, it's really just a cliche action movie at the end of the day, which isn't necessarily a bad thing as long as it's, I guess, fun about the way it does it, and it is, but like I said, imagine the gloriousness of this movie if it was from like if it was from a director that was like really skilled in the action department. You know what this really feels like, actually, is, not that this person's always a skilled director, but has been in the past. This would have been the perfect Luc Besson movie. Like, this would have been a Luc Besson movie I probably totally would have gotten on board with. But nevertheless, it's from a guy that's, I'm assuming, still a no-name, Brett Leonard. That name doesn't quite ring a bell. If I looked it up right now, I'd probably have seen maybe one or two things, but doesn't ring a bell off the top of my head. But regardless, there is something glorious in here, even if it doesn't completely rear its head. It does rear its head a lot more than Johnny Mnemonic does, and does seem to want to try a little harder to explore the territories that it doesn't quite get into, or doesn't have quite the time, or I guess the brain to get into. But like I said, it feels like it tries a lot harder than Johnny Mnemonic does, unfortunately, despite the fact that Johnny Mnemonic feels a bit more, you know, mass scale in what it could have done. This one just sort of almost does itself a favor by trying not to go too far in it and just sort of bringing it down to an action movie. It's just the only problem is, like I said, it could have been a more skillful action movie with a bit more of a brain. But even so, and the fact of throwing in like a little revenge plot in there that he still technically can kill his family's killer again, should he choose so, because it's still definitely in Sid's mind that he did that. So that's also a really cool concept. So yeah, as far as all that goes, I do think Virtuosity actually did better in going for its ideas almost by compacting them into one genre that's a much simpler genre, which I don't know that Johnny Mnemonic could have ever benefited from that, given its concept to begin with. It's definitely something that needs much more exploration and can't just be that simple, I think. Whereas Virtuosity almost like thrives on that. So yeah, but overall, it's very clear to see that. I think that's why it's so easy to be hard on Johnny Mnemonic, is because of all the potential that's in there, that we knew was in there. To where it's like, it almost makes you, like, a part of you wants to be easy on it because you can just watch it a few times and it's, you know, serves its purpose as entertainment enough. But it just feels like that's doing the movie a disservice, because we really could have had something really interesting here. So in the meantime, we have to settle for the guilty pleasure action movie, so yes, that's what the theme was underwhelming science fiction, I suppose. So, next week, I think I might know what I'm going to do next week, unless something changes, I don't know. So, and then the review video, obviously, in the next couple of days is going to be 12 Netflix movies. Hooray. So, and then I'll get to searching will be the following week among whatever else there is, like Peppermint and The Nun and stuff like that. So, yeah, so until all that stuff, that's it.